We're officially 1 month into 2023 Overwatch League free agency and multiple months into the start of the offseason. It's arguably the most important part of the season aside from the playoffs, as it very much decides what your destiny is going to be depending on your actions. Who's benefited the most and who's fallen apart? Here's the biggest winners and losers of the 2023 Overwatch League offseason so far. Starting off with winner number 5, we have the Florida Mayhem, who may surprise some people to see them on this list, but the truth of the matter is, they've had a pretty underrated offseason so far with some of the actions they've taken. They lost a couple of interesting prospects, such as Hydron, Animo, and even Surmajed, but in return, the investment they're getting just might be worth it. For starters, it's great that they kept their core of Someone, RuPaul, as well as Checkmate. They were all solid performers in 2022, but now you're adding in some young and exciting talent in Chorong and Merit, who both were very promising rookies. Chorong is somebody to look out for sure, as he was a solid main support player in his first year on Toronto Defiant. Some people may not notice him all that much for the simple fact that, for one, he plays the least flashy position in the game, and two, he played on a team that wasn't that great, which only makes him even harder to stand out because he is on main support. But what you need to know is that this guy is solid. He has a lot of upside, and with a good coaching staff and better team around him, he truly could take his game to the next level. And Merit's a bit more interesting, as Hydron played at a very close level to him in certain scenarios, but Merit overall in a lot of people's eyes has the higher upside based off of how he performed on the Outlaws, and we could very well see that continue on a Mayhem team that might actually give him even more resources than he got on the Houston Outlaws. These two pickups alone make the Mayhem very well rounded, and they also have a pretty interesting prospect in Sauna to look out for, so I'd say that in general, the Mayhem had a pretty productive and positive offseason that could net them in a good direction. At loser number 5, I'm going with the APAC/Eastern region as a whole. It seems worth it to shout out this region as a whole because everybody is kind of suffering in a way thanks to all of the chaos that is going on in China, with Blizzard not renewing their licensing agreement with them. In fact, the Chinese services for Overwatch and all Blizzard games recently just shut down, so that's the end of that. It's led to a lot of uncertainty in that region, and as a result, teams don't want to invest, they're losing out on money. So we're seeing a huge decrease in the amount of money that teams are able to spend this offseason in that region. Even some of the more well-off teams are probably going to suffer some sort of budget issue, so it's just a really sucky situation for that entire region to be in, and it might just affect how competitive they can be as a whole and their ability to win a grand finals. At winner number 4, I'm going with the San Francisco Shock. A pretty obvious choice. It seems like it's kind of hard to go up considering just how good they were, making it to the grand finals and all in 2022, but generally speaking, they made two of the biggest acquisitions, well, rookie acquisitions, I should say, of this entire offseason. Through the boatload of talent they have on their academy team, O2 Blast, they picked up two of the most noteworthy rookie prospects in the entire league in Max and Heesong. Heesong, while not at the level of proper potential, was an elite player in his own right, and I think him and proper combined will make the Shock extremely flexible and dangerous no matter the meta. And don't be sleeping on Max either. He's put up quite the resume on O2 Blast himself. He's a solid all-around off-tank player who's going to be extremely dominant right from day one potentially, especially with Krusty coaching him, and now the Shock can officially comm fully in Korean, no problem, which makes the Max signing really good. And just to round out their O2 Blast core young stud super team, they went ahead and picked up the famous main support player out of Seoul Dynasty this year, Vindame. Dude exploded onto the scene behind Toby's coaching and has never looked back as an elite player on all of the main support heroes in the game. It's no offense to Violet in this scenario, who is probably going to get replaced at this point. It's just that Vindame is more of a natural main support player with a higher ceiling at this role, given how young he is. But it's not a bad thing at all, Shock fans. Vindame can play a bunch of different styles, he's pretty flexible in his own right, and he has a lot of previous synergy with a bunch of the players that he'll be working with. So overall, the Shock have been doing excellent this offseason, and there should be more good moves to come. At loser number 4, we're going with the Dallas Fuel, who didn't have quite the catastrophic offseason as a lot of people initially expected, but they still did make some notable downgrades, and they're just not what they were 1 year prior. The Dallas Fuel allowed for all of their players to explore in free agency this offseason, and as a result, they lost 3, count 'em, 3 players from their key championship core, that being their Grand Finals MVP, Fearless, Chio, and Fielder. All things considered, that's a pretty hefty loss. At his best, Fearless can compete with just about anybody. Then Fielder and alexyOWL were arguably the best backline in the Overwatch League last year. The bright side is they still have Hanbin, Sparkle, and Edison, but when you think about it, that's still half of a core that is gone. And no matter who you're replacing them with, no matter how good or bad, it's still just not going to compare because they're playing at the absolute pinnacle of play. Just having Hanbin alone should keep the tank situation okay, but it's the back line that's really going to draw some eyes. Going from alexyOWL and Fielder to Bliss and MCD is a notable downgrade for sure, and while they still could be good, it's not going to be the same, so as a result, the Dallas Fuel will not be as strong as a unit as they once were, and it's going to be more difficult to defend their championship. Is it possible? Yeah. Is it going to be a lot more challenging? Oh, you betcha. Winner number 3 is going to be our other team from Texas, the Houston Outlaws, who came out of left field by picking up Dallas's former ally Fearless, as well as a big-time playmaker at the flex support role in Shu. The happy pickup is good as well, but the noteworthy things are of course Shu and Fearless, who at their best are superstars in this league and some of the best players at their respective positions. Fearless, while still the only tank player on the Outlaws so far, gives them the most firepower they have ever seen at the tank role, and it's really not even close. And the same can be applied for the flex support position. Lastra, while a good main/flex support for this team, is a good trade-off if you're getting Shu. It's a good sacrifice to make, and you're not really going to miss him in the grand scheme of things if you're making that much of a difference. And something that's maybe a little underrated in this offseason for Houston is this idea of maintaining Pelican as your starting DPS player. There was a lot of speculation and expectations for that matter that Pelican would not be on this team past 2022. He mostly joined this team because he wanted to play with Piggy. That was the main idea. They're close friends. Once Piggy left by getting released from the team to pursue other opportunities, Pelican was visibly upset. So most of us assumed that he'd either want to go play with Piggy again or just get the heck out of Outlaws Nation in general. So this idea of bringing him back and building a superstar level core around him that is probably the best supporting cast he has ever had is really exciting, and Outlaws Nation should be very hyped for what's coming next. Loser number 3 is the Los Angeles Gladiators, and coming into this offseason, there were genuine concerns they could be in for a rough next couple of months as a lot of their team was allowed to explore free agency, and very quickly, those concerns turned into a real nightmare. The only good part of this offseason so far is that they've maintained Kevster and Funny Astro. Aside from that, any other critical piece is basically out the window. 5 big name players for this franchise over the last couple of years or so are all gone, just like that. The most noteworthy of which are of course Reiner, Shu, and Skewed, who played a pivotal role in helping this team win back-to-back tournaments during the early parts of 2022. The big 3, so to speak, that walked away are Reiner, who is a star in the making who still has room to improve and grow even more as a young tank player. You have Skewed, who's been solid since day 1 for this franchise, and of course the biggest loss of all, that being Shu, aka one of the best flex supports in the entire world, and arguably the best flex support in the league over the last 2 years. Shu is a transcendent talent that is damn near impossible to replace. He's one of the best playmaking flex supports in the history of professional Overwatch, and he was the only player to represent the MVP ballot on the support position this year. To compensate for this monumental loss, the Gladiators went ahead and picked up Lastra, who mind you isn't bad and could actually be a pretty good scheme fit on this team and have his own special role and way to contribute, but he's no Shu. That's just the sad truth. With all the losses piling up and other teams around them improving, the Gladiators' title window might have just officially closed, which definitely makes them one of the biggest losers of the offseason so far. Looking into biggest winner number 2, you've got the Boston Uprising, taking the rare W at this part of the season. Boston got new management, a new philosophy, and they're done messing around and hiding in the basement. They went all out. They weren't even considering keeping their old core. They had a new vision in mind. It's time to change the old ways of Boston and look into the win now mode. The glory days of the president of gaming are long behind them now because, lo and behold, the Boston Uprising assembled one of the most ridiculous looking veteran cores on paper we have ever seen, with championship experience basically from top to bottom. Let's get it straight. So you picked up arguably a top 2 tank player in the league last year in Smurf with unreal flexibility, championship experience, superstar playmaking, and everything you could ever dream of at the tank position. Just to add even more stability to your lineup, you picked up one of the most reliable support lines in Overwatch League history, formerly of the Shanghai Dragons, that being alexyOWL and alexyOWL. Those two enough on their own is pretty insane, but then you add in Twilight to give you one of the most insane, stacked-looking backline rotations in the history of this game. Twilight gives you synergy with people like Smurf and Striker, of course, and he provides extra playmaking, versatility, flexibility, whatever you need. Twilight, alexyOWL, and alexyOWL plus Smurf all at the same time is just dummy loaded, and you are ridiculously stable at your front and back line because of it. And for the cherry on top, you've got a fan favorite in Birdring leading the way at hitscan potentially, with Decay and Striker, who are maybe seen as like the problem children that could lead to an explosion within this team that keeps them from being anything special like they should be. But needless to say, they should be pretty happy with how stacked they are, and they should be in a position to do some very special things if they can stay out of their own way and focus on the game. This team is absolutely amazing. There's pretty much a ring represented by every single player except for, Decay? That's pretty darn ridiculous. This Boston team means business, and I think fans should be very excited, as this is quite easily the best team they have ever fielded. Big time W. Loser number 2 is going to be a specific APAC team. It's going to be the Shanghai Dragons. Aside from the obvious fact I went over with the APAC region in general, the Shanghai Dragons are down especially bad, as their entire core that helped them win a championship and output one of the best records over the last 3 years has been dismantled completely, and they have been left with absolutely nothing except for their coach, which is the only positive news that has come out of this offseason so far for them, as to this day, as of this recording, in this video, they still have absolutely no players on their roster, and they're wondering where they go from here. The Dragons are going, in all likelihood, from one of the best teams of all time to quite possibly a league bottom feeder that tries to figure out their identity. And Shanghai have it especially bad, as they are owned by NetEase, aka the company that was in charge of trying to renegotiate with Blizzard to get a new licensing agreement going, which ultimately failed, leading to the complete and utter shutdown of Blizzard games in China. That, plus the declining investments in Chinese Overwatch as a result of all of this, has the Dragons in a very precarious situation, and all we can do now is hope that things aren't as bad as they seem. And now, at winner number 1, I'm going with the Atlanta Reign, who absolutely crushed this offseason. They have a new head coach in Gator, and he's not messing around. This guy is cooking big time with management. They're going for that win now mentality. It seemed a little strange to move away from their talented North American core with a ton of potential, but that quickly became an afterthought when it was announced that they would pick up some of the most sought after free agents in this entire class, that being Lip, aka the best hit skin in the world. Plus, Chio and Fielder, who like I said earlier, are arguably the best backline in the league. And honestly, it's not just these three. The Stalker acquisition is kind of flying under the radar as a pretty underappreciated pickup. Stalker put in some good minutes for the Seoul Dynasty in 2022. He was more so a backup and a rotational piece than anything else, but during the times when he was a starter, he put in the work. The only real confusing part about this offseason for Atlanta is keeping Hawk as the starting tank player. He very obviously feels out of place on this roster, all things considered, but he's still a talented player, and the Atlanta Reign still had an extremely productive offseason, picking up 3 of the best players in the league at their respective positions. So for that, I'll give them a pass and say that they have had the best offseason so far. And at number 1 for losers so far in the 2023 offseason, I'm rolling with the Seoul Dynasty. Quite possibly the team that got hit the hardest by the APAC drama, the Seoul Dynasty had no choice but to change their philosophy and release all of their players from the previous season with the exception of Prophet. Smurf and Vindame are the biggest losses, of course, because they are 2 of the best players at their respective positions, but in general, the Dynasty had a solid core. All they really needed to do was maintain most of it and then pick up another piece or 2 in free agency or through trades, and they'd be right in the same spot again where they could compete for the top spot in their region and quite possibly make a playoff run. But all that's nothing but a pipe dream now. It's a strange new era over in Seoul. They're usually the ones to go for the big names and to go for those major acquisitions, but that's not going to be the case for the first time ever. They're going young, either through diamonds in the rough, or through notable contenders' talent. This young new team, whenever they're announced, could still be enjoyable to watch and somewhat competitive within their own region, but knowing that they went from what they had to this is absolutely depressing. It's like winning the lottery and then going bankrupt. Between such heavy losses and still technically being right in the middle of a championship window, the Seoul Dynasty absolutely, as of right now, occupy the #1 spot in the losers list. And those are your biggest winners and losers through the first month of free agency.